I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. During Tuesday's Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing, Senator Ron Johnson questioned Terry Whitehead, a former jail administrator at the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, about the problems in that facility. Whitehead detailed the conditions at the prison, stating she was shocked and appalled. She said that prisoners had access to cell phones, which could allow them to order murders beyond the prison walls. Whitehead described the, quote, shocking moment when she discovered the Atlanta prison was unusually dysfunctional. Watch the full line of questioning.
Ms. Shepard, quickly, you are generally dealing with people in pretrial detention, correct?
My testimony was focused on that. We also represent, for example, I have a client right now who is charged with committing a criminal act while inside the facility. So we have different sorts of access.
So are those individuals separated, those populations, pretrial detainees versus the general prison population?
Yes, and there's also an additional population at the facility, which is transferees. So inmates who are being transferred from one BOP facility to another. Those should also be separated. I have seen clients who were pre-trial who were in the same pod or unit as transferees, people who were already serving a sentence.
So I mean, the whole prison sounds like a horror show, but is it particularly broken in terms of pre-trial detention, or is there really no difference?
I believe that's accurate, yes. It is particularly the egregious lockdown conditions that I've described, the egregious nutrition and hygiene conditions that I've described are specific to pretrial detainees.
Okay. Ms. Whitehead, I'm deaf in one ear and you're very soft-spoken, so if you could get your microphone a little bit closer to you so I can hear better. You obviously have served in a number of prisons around the country. I think my main question to you is, how extraordinary, how out of the ordinary is Atlanta and the Atlanta way versus other situations you've been in?
As I indicated, I was shocked. I was appalled by the conditions at Atlanta. Cell phones. In July 2021, approximately 700 cell phones were recovered in a sweep in Atlanta.
Just quickly, while we're on describe why that's such a problem in a prison.
Inmates are not allowed to have cell phones in a prison. Inmates can actually call hits on anybody outside of the prison using a cell phone. Cell phones are not monitored. Inmates can make drug transactions, commit further crime utilizing a cell phone.
So again, that's a big problem when you have 700 cell phones in a prison.
That is
but
a huge
go on.
problem. Cell phones are in other institutions. To put it in perspective, there may be one cell phone to 50 inmates at another institution. Atlanta had approximately 1,400 inmates and 700 phones were found. That's one to every other inmate.
So you started your career in Atlanta.
I did.
And then, I don't want to age you or anything, but you had a career all over the country, and then you came back really at the tail end of your career. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea how long conditions were as you found them? Is this something that had been going on for years?
When I started my career at USP Atlanta as an intern, I was learning the Bureau way, not the Atlanta. I was learning the Bureau. I traveled about 8 institutions over 30 years, gathering knowledge, learning policies. And I went back to Atlanta. I was very proud to go back to Atlanta. When I got to Atlanta and I saw that Atlanta operated totally different from other institutions, it was a shocking moment that Atlanta is far off the grid when it comes to the BOP.
So there are problems at other Bureau of Prisons, but nothing like Atlanta.
Not that I've experienced.
Not even close. Dr. Ramirez, there's generally somebody in charge. I mean, there's some leader, leader of the pack, so to speak. There's somebody generally in charge. My guess is not necessarily the warden. I mean, do you either of you know who's in charge there? Really? I mean, who created the Atlanta way?
I think the Atlanta way has been ongoing for many, many years, long before I started my bureau and probably even before Ms. Whitehead. In my experience at USP Atlanta, I think the warden, though identified as the leader, per se, has very little authority. The Southeast Regional Office, where the regional director is about 12 miles away. And from my experience, that office had a lot of input and oversight into what was going on in the institution, though they may or may not have been informed about the details and minutia of what was going on at the institution. So I think it's kind of divided.
So I realize the sensitivity of my sensitive nature of my question here, because I'm shocked, quite honestly, how much retaliation we actually see within government agencies. So I understand the fear, but I'm trying to determine who's in the end responsible for this. I mean, you can say, you know, the director, you can say the warden. I'm trying to figure out exactly why this continued to go on and on and on. I know both you and Ms. Whitehead attempted to report these things. Who did you report this to?
I reported it both to the warden and the regional director. In some cases, as it related to the suicides, it was reported to central office, DC. I think a lot of what you're seeing is years and years of staff and management not being held accountable. So it enables further misconduct, almost making it normal.
So when you report that to the warden or somebody at the regional center, is your assessment they were fully aware of this? They just realized there's nothing they were going to do about it or could do about it, and they just sort of ignored your concerns?
Yeah, my assessment was they were fully aware. I know they were fully aware because I advised them myself. In many cases, I believe they chose to take no action because it was far more difficult to take action than to look the other way.
Would those people in charge, would they be in fear of retaliation themselves? And not necessarily career retaliation, but physical retaliation from people in the prison?
In my opinion, I don't believe that they would be in fear of physical retaliation, but I do believe that the regional director is a political position to some degree, and there is quite a bit of caution when attempting to address misconduct.
So with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Whitehead, can you bring some context to, I think you understand the thrust of my questions here. When there are ongoing problems, it goes on and on and on, and people are aware of it, but they're just not simply addressing it. Can you explain why?
It appears the problems in Atlanta have been growing for years. Atlanta has a reputation. At one point, it was the flagship of the Bureau of Prisons. Atlanta has a reputation. There's the Atlanta way. Typically, wardens will make a round through Atlanta maybe 2 to 3 years. They have a career to keep growing. If you go to Atlanta and you, per se, rock the boat or you don't go along with the Atlanta way, then it can ruin your career.
I'm just, so the people that report to you as the warden, they would be able to ruin your career if you don't discipline them and correct what's happening at the prison. Is that? Again, I'm trying to understand this.
So the warden does have limited ability to make change, particularly at Atlanta. The regional director, which is the warden's supervisor, has more stake or more weight in making change in Atlanta. If the warden goes against the regional director's view of Atlanta, then the warden's going to be moved.
Okay, so it really, the responsibility really falls more on the regional director's shoulders than the warden's shoulders.
More safe for Atlanta.
How would you, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.